My name is Emily, and for 7 years, I believed the smallest version of myself was the one my husband loved most. When we first met in Austin, Texas, Ryan seemed confident in a way that made me feel safe. He always knew what restaurant to pick, what vacation to plan, what decision to make. I mistook control for certainty and certainty for love. Our friends called us the perfect couple. They didn't hear the little comments. You'd be prettier if you smiled more. You always overthink everything. You're lucky someone like me chose you. The first time he said that, I laughed. The 100th time, I believed it. I had a marketing job I genuinely enjoyed, but Ryan constantly compared my salary to his. My paycheck keeps this house running, he'd say whenever we disagreed. Eventually, I stopped mentioning my accomplishments. When I earned a promotion, I quietly accepted it without celebrating. When my campaign won an industry award, I left the plaque in my office instead of bringing it home. It felt easier than hearing him explain why it wasn't a big deal. My confidence disappeared one tiny moment at a time. One Saturday, we attended his college friend's barbecue. Everyone gathered around the patio while conversations bounced between work, children, and travel plans. Someone asked me about my career. Before I could answer, Ryan laughed. Oh, Emily likes to think she's climbing the corporate ladder. Everyone chuckled politely. Then he added, honestly, she'd be lost without me reminding her how the real world works. The laughter grew louder. I forced a smile. Inside, something quietly cracked. On the drive home, I stared through the passenger window. You embarrassed me, I finally whispered. He sighed dramatically. There you go again. What does that mean? You're too sensitive. I just wanted you to respect me. I was joking. It didn't feel like a joke. He shook his head. You make everything difficult. That sentence followed me for weeks. Maybe I was difficult. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe respect was something people earned, and I simply hadn't earned enough. A month later, my company announced leadership training in Chicago. Only 12 employees were selected nationwide. When my manager called me into her office, she smiled before I even sat down. Emily, congratulations. For what? You were our first choice. I couldn't speak. The program lasted 3 months, and almost guaranteed promotion into executive management. It was everything I'd worked toward for years. I drove home rehearsing how I'd tell Ryan. When I shared the news over dinner, he barely looked up from his phone. So you'll be gone for 3 months? Mostly weekdays. I'll come home some weekends. He shrugged. Seemed selfish. The excitement drained from my face. It's a career opportunity. What about me? I've supported your career for years. That's different. How? My job actually pays the important bills. I stared at him. For the first time, I noticed he never celebrated anything unless it belonged to him. The next morning, I almost declined the program. My finger hovered over the email. Then my manager walked by my desk. I hope you're excited, she said. You deserve this. 3 simple words. You deserve this. No one had said something like that to me in years. I accepted. Ryan wasn't happy. For weeks, he complained about cooking dinner alone, about doing laundry, about weekends without me. He never once asked what I was learning. Chicago changed more than my Ursum. Every morning, I sat in rooms filled with women leading companies, negotiating contracts and making million-dollar decisions. They weren't louder than everyone else. They were simply confident. One evening after class, a mentor named Denise invited a few of us for coffee. She asked each woman to describe herself without mentioning her job or relationships. When my turn came, I froze. I'm Ryan's wife. She smiled gently. I asked who you are. I couldn't answer, not because I didn't know the words, because I had forgotten them. That night in my hotel room, I cried harder than I had in years, not because my marriage was failing, because I realized I had disappeared inside it. For the rest of the program, I kept a notebook. Every day, I wrote one thing I liked about myself. I solve problems. I stay calm under pressure. I'm compassionate. I'm creative. The list grew longer. So did I. When I returned home, nothing about the house had changed, but everything about me had. Ryan noticed immediately. You seem different. I am. You think this program made you better than everyone? No. It reminded me who I already was. He laughed. There she goes, with the motivational speeches. Normally, I would have apologized. This time, I simply smiled. The silence seemed to bother him more than any argument ever had. Over the next few weeks, I stopped explaining every decision. I stopped asking permission to meet friends. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. Then, one Friday evening, Ryan invited several neighbors over without telling me. As everyone sat around our dining table, one neighbor congratulated me on completing the leadership program. Before I could respond, Ryan smirked. Don't encourage her too much. Everyone looked confused. He laughed. She's starting to think she doesn't need me anymore. The room fell quiet. Every eye turned toward me. I took a slow breath, and for the first time in 7 years, I decided my next sentence would change everything. The silence around the table felt heavier than any argument Ryan and I had ever had. Everyone waited for me to laugh along, just as I always had. For years, I would have smiled, changed the subject, and protected his image while shrinking my own. But something inside me had changed in Chicago. I looked at Ryan calmly. Then I smiled, not to hide my feelings, but because I finally knew who I was. I've never believed I didn't need people, I said softly, but I also don't believe anyone should make another person feel small just to feel important. No one spoke. Ryan's smile disappeared. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I simply stood up. I'm going to make some coffee. Anyone who wants a refill is welcome. The conversation slowly shifted, but the room never returned to the way it had been before. Later that night, after the guests left, Ryan closed the front door harder than necessary. What was that supposed to mean? It meant exactly what I said. You embarrassed me. I answered honestly. You made me look like the bad guy. I didn't describe you, Ryan. I described how I want to be treated. He crossed his arms. So now I'm the problem? I'm saying our marriage has a problem. He waited for me to apologize. I didn't. The next morning, I went for a walk alone. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to think of ways to keep the peace. I was thinking about what peace actually felt like. When I came home, I opened my notebook from Chicago. Every page reminded me of the woman I had started becoming again. I realized confidence isn't loud, it's consistency. Over the following weeks, I made small changes. I accepted invitations from friends without asking for permission. I celebrated my promotion with coworkers. I framed my leadership certificate and hung it in my home office. When Ryan mocked it, I didn't argue. I simply left it on the wall. My silence was no longer fear, it was confidence. One evening, he asked, "Why don't you react anymore?" I looked at him and answered honestly, "Because I'm no longer trying to convince you that I have value." He stared at me. For the first time, he had no clever response. A few days later, he surprised me. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "I don't know if I like what you've become." I nodded. "I understand." He looked confused. "That's it?" "Yes. Aren't you going to fight for this marriage?" "I've been fighting for this marriage for 7 years. He looked away. "I just won't fight against myself anymore." Those words stayed between us for a long time. The following month, I suggested we attend marriage counseling. I made it clear that counseling wasn't about assigning blame. It was about learning whether we could build a relationship based on mutual respect. Ryan refused. "I don't need someone telling me how to live." I nodded again. "That's your choice." "And yours?" My choice is to stop living in a marriage where respect depends on staying silent. A week later, I packed a small suitcase and moved into a furnished apartment near my office. I wasn't leaving out of anger. I was creating space for clarity. My family worried. Some friends asked why I hadn't screamed or exposed him, because revenge wasn't what I wanted. I wanted peace. Over the next few months, I rebuilt a life that looked surprisingly familiar. I worked. I laughed with friends. I called my parents more often. I joined a weekend hiking group. Most importantly, I stopped measuring myself through someone else's opinion. Ryan reached out several times. Sometimes he apologized. Sometimes he blamed me. Sometimes he promised to change. I listened respectfully. But I also paid attention to actions instead of words. Eventually, he admitted something he had never said before. I think I needed you to feel smaller so I could feel bigger. It was the most honest sentence I'd ever heard from him. I thanked him for telling the truth. But honesty alone couldn't erase years of disrespect. Months later, our divorce was finalized peacefully. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes, no public arguments, just 2 signatures and 2 different futures. Today, when people ask what happened to my marriage, I don't tell them I lost my husband. I tell them I found myself. Looking back, I realized the most painful sentence Ryan ever said wasn't, "You're lucky I married you." The most painful part was that I believed him. Until one day, I quietly didn't. That became the beginning of everything. Because self-respect doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives the moment you stop asking someone else for permission to believe in yourself. If this story touched you, please comment and subscribe. I have one question for you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your self-respect? Let me know your answer below.